My wife went on a trip, came back pregnant, and tried to corner me. She sat across our kitchen table with her hands folded and told me the baby was mine. She said she found out after she landed. She said these things happen. What she expected was that I would do what I always did: absorb it, adjust, find a way to make the numbers work. What she did not expect was that I had already done the math: 12 weeks, 19 days in Portugal. I said nothing. I just picked up the appointment card from the counter and walked to my car. The card was pale blue, the kind medical offices print on cardstock with your next visit written by hand in black ink. The nurse had noted the gestational week in the top right corner. 12. I had picked it up off the reception desk almost without thinking, the way you grab a pen or pocket your keys. Diane was still talking to the scheduler. I just took it and slipped it into my jacket. That was 3 days after she got home. The first 3 days, I told myself I was in shock. I made her breakfast both mornings. I asked about her flight. I listened to her describe the trip in small, careful pieces. The food, the cobblestones, the hostel that turned out to be nicer than expected. She was warm in a way she had not been in months. Attentive, asking about my work with actual follow-up questions. Laughing at things I said. I noticed it and filed it without naming it. She sat me down on the third evening, hands folded. Steady voice. The baby was ours, she said. She had taken a test at home after feeling off for a few days. She was shocked too. But this was something they had always wanted, wasn't it? Her use of they for something she had clearly thought through alone was the first thing I noticed. The second thing was that she did not cry. Diane cried easily, reflexively, sometimes productively. She was not crying now. I said I needed to think. I drove to my brother Joel's apartment across town, and he made coffee without asking why I was there at 9 on a Tuesday. He is a contractor, practical about everything, not given to speeches. I told him what she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you want to know, or do you want to not know?" I said I already knew. He nodded and topped off my cup. That was essentially the conversation. I went home. I slept in the guest room, claiming I had a work call at 5 and didn't want to wake her. She accepted this without comment. The next morning, I agreed to go to her first OB appointment. Dr. Ozzy's office was in a medical complex about 20 minutes from our house. The waiting room had the usual arrangement of magazines no one reads and a television showing a cooking segment with the sound off. Diane was calm and social with the nurse. I sat in the chair beside the exam table and watched. The dating ultrasound confirmed 12 weeks. Dr. Osei gave Diane a general rundown, and at some point I heard myself ask, in what I hoped was a neutral voice, when conception would have been. Dr. Osei said the estimate pointed to a window roughly 10 to 14 weeks back, give or take a few days in either direction. She said it in the manner of someone stating the weather. Diane did not look at me. On the way out, I took the appointment card off the desk. The gestational week was written in the nurse's handwriting in the top right corner. 12. I put it in my jacket pocket, and we drove home, mostly in silence, while Diane answered a text from her mother. That evening, she went to bed early. I sat at the kitchen table with my work tablet, which syncs to the firm's project management system, and I opened my calendar. I went backward. The Westfield Bridge assignment had put me on site 180 miles north of home for a block of 11 straight days, in a motel the firm booked and billed directly. I had Priya's sign-off records in the system. I had the motel receipts in my email. I had my own logged hours. The conception window Dr. Osei described landed almost entirely inside that assignment. I went to Sophia's Instagram next because Sophia had been on the Portugal trip and posted constantly. There were photos from Lisbon and Porto. There were group dinner photos. In 2 of them, standing slightly behind Diane at a restaurant table, was a man I did not recognize. Dark jacket, early 40s, easy posture. I took screenshots of both photos and of the trip dates visible on Sophia's story highlights. I opened a personal cloud account I had set up years ago for work backup, one Diane had never had reason to know about, and I saved everything there. I did not confront her. I went to bed. Over the following week, Diane posted a photo of a tiny pair of shoes she had apparently purchased, captioned with a single heart. Several of our mutual friends replied with congratulations. One of my colleagues sent me a thumbs up emoji, and I replied with a thanks because I did not know what else to do. Diane was visibly settling into a version of events where the question of timing had already been resolved to everyone's satisfaction. I called Sandra Cho's office on a Thursday morning. I had seen her name through work. She handles family law. Someone at the firm had used her during a difficult divorce 2 years ago and mentioned she was straightforward. Her assistant gave me an appointment for the following week. The night before that appointment, Diane's mother called. Celia Reyes has always been cordial to me, if a little performative about it. She called to say how happy she was, that she knew Diane had been nervous about telling me, that she was so glad we were handling it together as a family. I thanked her, then I asked conversationally when Diane had told her about the pregnancy. Celia said, "Oh, she called me from Portugal. She was so nervous, poor thing." I said that was great. I said I was glad she knew. I kept my voice even. We said goodbye. I sat with that for about 30 seconds. Then I wrote it down in a notes app, verbatim, with the date and time, and I put my phone face down on the table. Diane had told her mother she was pregnant during the trip, not after. During. Sandra Cho's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, with the kind of waiting room that is very quiet and slightly too cold. I brought a folder. She reviewed what was in it. The appointment card, a printout of my work calendar, the Instagram screenshots with timestamps, and the handwritten note about Celia's call, without visible reaction. When she looked up, she said the timeline argument was strong. She also told me, without softening it, what they could not yet do. A prenatal paternity test requires either Diane's cooperation or a court order, and even with an order, enforcement before birth is complicated. We could request it. Diane could refuse. I asked what filing for divorce would look like. She told me. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "File." I drove home. I made dinner. Diane came into the kitchen and said it smelled good, and I said thanks and handed her a plate and we ate. She told me about a client consultation she had that afternoon for a condo renovation. I said it sounded like a good project. I kept the appointment card in the inside pocket of my work jacket. Not for any strategic reason at first. I just had not taken it out. It was there when I zipped my jacket the next morning, and I left it. 3 days later, Diane was served at the house. She called me 4 times in the hour after the process server left. I did not answer the first 3. On the 4th, I picked up because I was sitting in the parking lot of a hardware store with nowhere specific to be, and the repeated buzzing was making it hard to think. "You filed," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "Gerald." Long pause. "We need to talk about this." I told her my attorney would be in touch and ended the call. That was not me being dramatic. That was Sandra's specific instruction. Diane retained her own attorney within 36 hours. I know this because Sandra received the opposing counsel's introduction letter 2 days after service and called me to say the other side was moving quickly. The letter included preliminary language about Diane's right to marital support, given her condition and her contributions to the household over 6 years of marriage. Contributions. I had paid 70% of the down payment on our house. I had covered the cost overruns from a kitchen renovation Diane managed and then mostly abandoned when a more interesting client came along. I had turned down a position in another city because she did not want to move, and I had done it without making it a long conversation. None of that is the kind of thing you lead with. It is just the kind of thing you know about yourself while you were sitting in a lawyer's office being told about your contributions. The support motion came about 3 weeks later. Diane's attorney argued she was entitled to continued mortgage coverage, health insurance through my employer plan, and additional monthly payments, not as spousal support yet, but as a form of provisional family support, on the basis that the child may be mine, and that Diane had restructured her career around our household. Sandra called it a legitimate legal threat. She was not saying that to frighten me. She was saying it because it was true. If the judge granted interim relief before we established paternity, Diane would have a financial arrangement locked in that would be difficult to unwind later, regardless of what any test eventually showed. I moved out the following week. Joel co-signed a short-term lease on a furnished apartment about 12 minutes from my office. It was small and had carpet the color of old oatmeal, and the upstairs neighbor apparently moved furniture between midnight and 2 in the morning on a rotating schedule. But it was mine. Joel helped me move in a Saturday afternoon. He brought sandwiches and a case of water and made exactly one joke about the carpet, which I appreciated. The joint account was the next problem. Diane began making withdrawals, not dramatic amounts, but consistent ones, 2 or 3 times a week. Sandra flagged it and filed a motion to restrict joint account activity pending division. The court granted it within 10 days. After that, the account was essentially frozen, except for fixed bill payments. I opened a separate account and had my direct deposit redirected. I was still going to work every day. The Westfield Bridge project was in its final phase. My project director, a methodical woman named Priya Mehta, who had been with the firm 11 years, gave me a commendation after we delivered the phase sign-off on schedule. She did it in a brief email that I printed and added to the folder Sandra was maintaining, not because a work commendation is legal evidence of anything in particular, but because Priya had co-signed my travel documentation for the entire Westfield assignment. Her name was on the project logs that established where I was during the weeks that mattered. I wanted her involvement in this story to be easy to trace. The phone records arrived through standard discovery in the 5th week. Sandra reviewed them and called me on a Wednesday evening to tell me there was a number appearing with notable frequency in the months before the Portugal trip, heavy contact, a gap during the trip itself, then resumed contact starting the day Diane landed. The number was not saved in my contacts. I did not recognize it. Sandra said she would have it identified through the carrier records included in the production. The number belonged to a man named Raphael, property developer. He had been referred to Diane through a shared client connection about 8 months before the trip. I sat with that for a while. 8 months. I thought about the previous winter, the way Diane had been distracted at dinner, the way her phone went face down whenever she set it on the counter. I had noticed. I had not asked. I think some part of me had calculated that asking would cost more than not asking, and I had made that trade without fully deciding to. Discovery also produced Diane's income records. Her attorney had filed a declaration stating she had significantly reduced her client work during the marriage to prioritize the household and support my career. Her actual invoices, produced alongside the declaration, showed $47,000 in consulting fees. Over the years, her attorney claimed she had worked minimally. It was not a fortune, but it was not nothing, and it was not consistent with the narrative of professional sacrifice. Sandra noted this in the margin of her copy with a single underlined word: inconsistent. About 6 weeks after I filed, Diane called and asked to meet for coffee, not through her attorney, directly from her personal number on a Sunday morning. I was making eggs when the call came in, and I answered it before I thought about whether I should. She said she did not want this to become a war. She said she had made a mistake, and she was not making excuses. She said she was scared, and she was sorry. I noticed she did not say what the mistake was, specifically. It could have been interpreted as the affair, or as poor communication, or as any number of smaller things she might have decided to characterize as mistakes. I asked her one question: "Will you agree to the prenatal paternity test?" Pause. "Gerald, do you really want to do that to a baby?" I told her I would have Sandra reach out to her attorney. She said I was punishing someone who hadn't done anything wrong. I said I understood she felt that way. "Okay," she said, and then she was quiet for a moment. "Okay." We hung up. I reported the call to Sandra the same day. Sandra was not surprised. She said the framing of the test as harm to the baby was a predictable move and that it would likely appear in some form during the hearing. I told Joel about the coffee call that evening. He was refinishing a cabinet in his garage and kept working while I talked. When I finished, he said, "She thought you'd agree to meet and then feel bad about the test when you saw her in person." He sanded a corner. "She's been doing math too, just different math." That was probably the most useful thing anyone said to me during those 2 months. The support motion hearing was set for early the following month. Diane's attorney had added language to the motion, suggesting that my decision to file while Diane was pregnant demonstrated instability and an unwillingness to take responsibility. One of my colleagues, a guy named Derek, who I had eaten lunch with dozens of times, mentioned in the elevator one afternoon that he had heard Diane was having a hard time and that it was a shame things had gone this direction. He said it the way you say something when you have been told a version of events that you believe, but that you're also hoping might be more complicated. I said the attorneys were handling it and pressed my floor button. Later that week, Sandra received a letter from Diane's attorney proposing early settlement on asset division in exchange for Marcus, for Gerald dropping all paternity-related motions, dropping them entirely. Sandra forwarded it to me with a 3-word note: "Do not respond." The lab had received the sample for the non-invasive prenatal paternity test 3 weeks earlier. Diane had refused to participate, which meant the test was based on fetal DNA extracted from Diane's blood without requiring a sample from her directly. She could not be compelled to participate, but the test could still be completed using maternal blood and a sample from the alleged father. Sandra had explained the mechanism carefully. She had also explained that chain of custody documentation would need to be airtight for it to be admissible. The result was ready on a Friday. Sandra called me at 4:47 in the afternoon. I was still at my desk. She said, "Come in Monday morning." She did not read it over the phone. I asked if she could give me anything, and she said, "Monday," in a tone that meant she had made the decision about how this would be handled and was not revisiting it. I drove home to the apartment. I heated up something from the freezer and ate it standing at the counter. I checked the work tablet. I answered 2 emails about a drainage project that had nothing to do with any of this. The upstairs neighbor moved what sounded like a dresser to the other side of the room. I did not sleep particularly well, but I had already done the math weeks ago, and I knew what Monday would say. Sandra's office was quieter than usual on Monday morning. Her assistant did not make small talk. Sandra came out herself to bring me back, which she had not done the previous times. She closed the door and set a folder on the desk between us. Inside was a single printed page with the lab's letterhead and a chain of custody signature sheet clipped behind it. She slid it across. I read it once, then I read it again. The result confirmed I was not the biological father. I set the page down. I asked Sandra what this meant practically in terms of the hearing. She walked me through it without any ceremony. The result, with the chain of custody documentation intact and the lab's accreditation on file, was admissible. It did not automatically end the support motion, but it substantially changed the evidentiary landscape. Diane's attorney had built the motion on the premise that the child may be mine. The test answered that question. The hearing was 11 days away. Sandra said to go to work and let her prepare. I did. The drainage project needed site calculations, and I spent 3 days in the field with a junior engineer who asked good questions and reminded me slightly of myself at 26, back when the job was still mostly about the math and not yet about the meetings. On the 3rd afternoon, Priya stopped by the site and told me the project director had formally approved the promotion she had recommended 2 months earlier. She said it in the same tone she used for everything, even-keeled, no fanfare, and then she asked if I had eaten lunch. I said I had not. She handed me half a sandwich from her bag and went back to her car. That was a good afternoon. I noted it because good afternoons had been scarce. The morning of the support hearing, I arrived at the courthouse early and sat in the corridor outside the courtroom with Sandra, who reviewed the exhibit sequence one more time on her tablet. Diane arrived with her attorney about 10 minutes later. She looked composed. She was wearing a dark green dress I did not recognize. She did not look at me directly, which told me her attorney had given her the same instructions Sandra had given me. Inside, Diane's attorney opened by reiterating the motion's foundation. Diane was pregnant. Her career had been affected by the marriage, the child's paternity was unresolved, and interim support was warranted while proceedings continued. The argument was structured and professionally delivered. Sitting there listening to it, I could see exactly why Sandra had called it a legitimate threat. It sounded reasonable. It sounded on the surface like a straightforward request for basic fairness. Sandra presented the paternity test result as the first exhibit. Chain of custody documentation followed. Then the lab's accreditation certificate. Diane's attorney objected on procedural grounds, arguing the test had been obtained without Diane's participation. Sandra had anticipated this. She walked the judge through the specific mechanism, the fetal DNA extraction from maternal blood, which required only a sample from the alleged father, and submitted the procedural precedents. The judge reviewed the documentation without audible comment for almost 2 minutes. The courtroom was not silent in a dramatic sense. It was just a room with papers being examined. The judge denied the objection. Then Sandra submitted the gestational record from Dr. Osei's office, obtained through standard medical records discovery, 12 weeks at the date of the appointment. The conception window laid against Gerald's work travel documentation. Priya's written confirmation that Gerald had been on site for the Westfield Bridge project, 180 miles away, for the entirety of the relevant period. The motel receipts, the firm's project logs with Priya's co-signature. Diane's attorney asked for a brief recess. The judge gave 5 minutes. When they returned, Diane's attorney indicated that the motion for interim support was being withdrawn. He said this in a careful professional voice. He then immediately pivoted to asset division, suggesting that, given the circumstances, a quick and equitable settlement would benefit both parties. Sandra said the asset division would proceed through standard discovery on its established timeline. Diane was looking at a point slightly past her attorney's left shoulder. I recognized that expression. It was the one she used when something had not gone the way she calculated. The deposition excerpt came up in the asset hearing 2 weeks later. Celia Reyes had been deposed briefly as a character witness, and during that deposition, she had described Diane calling from Portugal because she was late and worried. This contradicted Diane's sworn statement. Her declaration had stated she discovered the pregnancy after returning home. The contradiction was not explosive in a courtroom sense. The judge simply noted it, but it meant Diane's sworn statement contained a false claim, and her attorney knew it, and after that the asset negotiation moved considerably faster. Diane's career sacrifice argument collapsed under its own numbers. The $47,000 in consulting fees across the years she claimed minimal professional activity was not consistent with the declaration. Her attorney stopped pressing that dimension. The down payment documentation was straightforward. Bank transfer records from the origination date showed Gerald's 70% contribution clearly. The marital home was sold, and the equity was divided accordingly. Diane's share was fair. It was not the elevated portion her attorney had initially sought. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday that felt like any other Thursday. Sandra shook my hand in the corridor and said, I had been a patient client. I said I appreciated her being direct with me from the beginning. She said that was the only way she knew how to work. I believed her. I found Diane in the parking lot. She was standing by her car, her attorney already gone. I do not know if she had waited or if it was coincidence. She looked at me for a moment and said, You could have just let it be. I said, You know I couldn't. She said she had never actually thought I would go through with all of it. The way she said it was not angry. It was closer to something she was reporting, like a fact she had recently confirmed. I said I knew. She got in her car. She did not look back as she pulled out. I stood there for probably 30 seconds, and then I walked to my own car and sat in it for a while without starting it. That evening, Celia called. She sounded tired. She said Diane had told her I had known all along and just wanted out of the marriage. I said, Celia, you told me yourself she called you from Portugal. Long pause on her end. She said, I know what I said. Then she said goodbye and hung up. I did not call back. There was nothing left to add. I spent the first month after the finalization in the oatmeal carpet apartment, and then found a better place closer to the river. A 1-bedroom with a reasonable kitchen and no furniture moving upstairs. I bought a used couch and a decent coffee maker and considered that sufficient progress for the moment. Joel came over and declared the couch acceptable and ate half my takeout. This is how Joel expresses approval. I understood it as such. The promotion came with a pay adjustment that made the rent comfortable rather than calculated. The drainage project wrapped and led to a referral, which led to a meeting with a municipal planning group that Priya said could become significant if I wanted to pursue it. I said I did. I started pursuing it. Diane sent 3 messages over the following 2 months. The first asked if we could talk. The second said she hoped I was doing okay. The third contained no text, just a photo. Our old kitchen, which she was apparently still using as a reference image for a client renovation pitch. I do not know if she meant that as anything. I did not respond to any of them. After the third one, they stopped. I did not enjoy the silence as much as I thought I would. That surprised me. I had been so certain that distance would feel clean. Instead, it just felt like subtraction. The marriage had been a real thing. The person I had been in it had been real. I could not decide whether to be more frustrated by the years I had spent adjusting to make the math work, or by the fact that I would probably have kept adjusting if the math had not finally made itself impossible to ignore. Some questions do not have satisfying answers. I have become reasonably comfortable with that. I went to Joel's for Sunday dinner most weeks. I kept the same running route I had used for years. I answered emails quickly and arrived to site meetings on time. which apparently passes for exceptional reliability in some corners of my industry. I had dinner with Priya and her husband once, at their suggestion, and it was an ordinary pleasant dinner where we talked about the municipal project and their renovation, and a documentary they had seen. No one mentioned Diane. It was not a pointed omission. She just had no role in that evening. The appointment card stayed in my desk at work, in a folder in the bottom drawer. I had moved it there from my jacket without thinking much about it. After the finalization, I assumed I would throw it away. I did not. It seemed significant in some way I had not finished processing, and I did not want to discard things I had not finished processing. 6 months after the divorce was final, I was at my desk on a Sunday afternoon, working through load calculations for a bridge segment in the municipal project. Joel had texted asking if I was coming to dinner. I typed back, yes. I reached for a pen and opened the desk drawer. The card was there, pale blue, the nurse's handwriting in the top right corner, 12. I looked at it for a moment. I did not need to count anything. I was not doing that math anymore. I put the pen in my hand and closed the drawer and went back to the calculations.